The following is a GoPowerCat.com production.
It is 63 in Lubbock, 48 degrees in Ames, Iowa, 67 in Manhattan, Kansas, and here it's Studio 73 in Frisco, Texas. It is 77 degrees. This is the Big 12 Insiders.
Welcome to the Big Insiders, your Big 12 sports show, presented by Synergy Financial Partners. Now let's go to booming North Texas, home of Studio 73. Here's your host, Brien Hanley.
Welcome to the Big Insiders. This is Brien Hanley, Big B. I'm joined today by Alec Busey and Jared Johnson. Gentlemen, how is it going today?
Going well. Yeah, going really well up here in Iowa, preparing for a busy weekend down at Baylor for the Cyclones, but enjoying a little bit of a week off away from team coverage as we hit hard on recruiting coverage.
Absolutely. Jared, how's it going today?
Things are great. Like you said, weather's it's warmer. It's not as cold as it was, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
Being a native Texan,
Absolutely.
I'm ready for it to be spring, the sun to come out and not be so cold all the time.
I got you.
But no, life is good, man. It's busy, always busy, never a dull moment doing what we do.
Absolutely. So basketball last night in the Big 12, 3 games. I mean, look, Kansas State, they're in a free fall right now. They got their head handed to them by Oklahoma at home. You always want to protect your home turf, but if you can't do that, you at least want to put on a decent showing. They got smacked around 73-53. Some offensive ineptitude that I don't remember seeing in a long, long time. Kansas smacked around Oklahoma State, which was expected. Kansas kind of getting their groove back after dropping 2 in a row. Best game maybe of the season that we saw. I thought the TCU Texas Tech game last night was a really good basketball game. TCU holding on at home. Tell me what you guys thought about the action from last night.
Yeah, I personally didn't get a ton of time to watch all 3 of the games. I spent some time with some friends. But, the Oklahoma K-State game was one that I got to watch a little bit of. And was not a pretty offensive performance like we talked a little bit before the show started. I think K-State had, 4 points in the first 10.5 minutes of the game. Yeah, it was not pretty. They obviously struggled to shoot the ball pretty significantly. They only make 30% of their shots, 15% from 3 or something. I think K-State's now looking like on the outside of the NCAA tournament bubble trying to get in, and they're just going to need to get some good wins if they want to get in. But, Tech had a pretty big game last night, and they weren't able to come through. Jared, I know you were pretty tuned into that one.
Yeah, it was. TCU won for 3 reasons, in my opinion. First off, they shot lights out, so you got to give them credit. I mean, they really did. I mean, Micah Peavy, who used to play at Texas Tech, was 4 for 4 from deep. That's really not his game. He's a terrific player, terrific defender, a great athlete, all that. A heady player, smart player, but not a great outside shooter. Just hasn't been his whole career. And, man, he was 4 for 4. Tech dared him to shoot, and he knocked him down. So, again, you got to tip the cap to, first off, TCU. They played a great game. Texas Tech, though, uncharacteristically, they were turnover prone, and a lot of them were careless turnovers. We haven't seen that all year from this team. But there was at least a handful of times where a Texas Tech player threw a pass and the other guy wasn't even looking. And they got a couple of turnovers that way, which, I mean, I saw more of that in one game last night than the entire season so far. And that was surprising. And then the third reason is Tech's defensive rebounding is its fatal flaw. As Joe Yeager, one of our writers here, I call him Mighty Joe here at Inside the Red Raiders, pointed out, he said that will probably be the reason why they get sent home. Whenever their season ends, that'll be the reason, is that they're just small. Since Devin Cambridge went down with a knee injury just before Big 12 play, he was their starting power forward and expected to bring a lot of length and versatility and toughness and all that. I mean, they've changed. They're more of an offensive, spread it out, finesse team, and they never, even going into the season, had a lot of depth up front. And I mean, Big 12 teams just pounce on your weakness. And TCU did last night. At one point, they had a 14-0 advantage in the second chance points. And I mean, that was the tale of the game.
Yeah. Becomes tough to be able to win games when you're turning the ball over, especially uncharacteristically, and then you get beat up on the glass. I mean, because usually it's one outweighs the other. You don't have turnovers if you get beat on the glass or vice versa. But when you're having both, that becomes problematic. Circling back to the K-State game, and Alec, you mentioned it earlier. It's like they are on the outside looking in. I firmly believe that. I talked last week about teams that start off the season that we think are going to be good. You get into conference play, and then all of a sudden things take a turn, and they're maybe not as good as what their non-conference record looks like. I thought it was Oklahoma. I thought Oklahoma was that team looking at what they had come. Well, it turns out it might be Kansas State. Now, there's still a lot of basketball left to be played, and the season can still be turned around. But the thing right now is you're searching for answers, and they just can't produce any offense, Jared. I just don't know where they're going to be able to find the offense to kind of turn things around.
It seems like Tyler Perry might be a key to the season. When he's hot, he's so streaky. When he's hot and he's on, they're pretty formidable. I mean, they are.
Absolutely.
But when he's not, I mean, they have problems offensively. And he's not much of a creator, really. No. I mean, he is a good passer, but he's not as much of he's not as athletic as a lot of the other guards in the Big 12. That's just the truth.
That's right.
But I want to caution, while we're talking about where they stand right now, Kansas State's a good basketball team. I've seen enough to know. Now, are they great? Are they top third or fourth of the Big 12? I don't know. But in a basketball season, especially like the Big 12, the ebb and flow of a season, I mean, just like a game where it's a game of runs, the season where, you want to be peaking at the right time, all those cliches, but it's true. I mean, even going back to my Uncle Rico days of playing basketball, I mean, we'd had games where we just couldn't beat teams that we should blow out or beat teams we had no business being in the gym with, just based on who's healthy, the psyche of guys, so many different things. So I expect Kansas State to be heard from before the end of the season for sure.
Yeah, I think this K-State team is capable of playing with some of the top teams in the Big 12. But like you said, B, I just think that their offense is too suspect at this point, which is weird because, you feel like you have three guys who are all capable scorers who are all averaging at least 15 points a game with Perry, Cam Carter, and Arthur Kaluma. But outside of those three, there's really not anyone else that they can rely on to make a shot. And I think Tyler Perry's transition from North Texas in the American up to the Big 12 maybe hasn't gone as smoothly as people thought it probably would this year when you look at some of his shooting percentages and how they haven't necessarily translated as well. And then also I think, it is worth noting that, they don't have Naquan Tomlin, and he was expected to be a starter for them. And we don't need to get into all the off the court circumstances that kind of led to him being dismissed from the program and eventually transferring over to Memphis for the second half of the season. But it is worth noting that they don't have someone who they were expecting to be a key part of their team. And I think that that's one of the reasons why we've seen K-State kind of really struggle here and fall to 14-7 and 500 in league play. And I just don't know how much I do see them kind of climbing out of that. I mean, I don't know what the rest of their schedule kind of looks like coming up ahead, but they got off to a good start in the Big 12, have a good win over Baylor, but they had a softer Big 12 schedule to open up the season where they didn't have to play Houston in their first 4 or 5. They didn't have to play Kansas in their first 4 or 5. And now that you've kind of seen them get out of that softer part of their schedule, they've gone on the road and they lost to Iowa State. They went on the road and got smashed by Houston. And then I think Oklahoma is a team that's kind of in that middle, along with so many other teams in the Big 12. And they go to Bramlage and they handle K-State pretty well. And it's not to take a line from Jerome Tang and count it as my own, but, last year when I was covering K-State, he often said, there's 3 or 4 nights of the year where you're going to win no matter what you do because you're shooting the lights out. And there's 3 or 4 nights of the year, no matter what you do, you're not going to win because you just can't hit water if you fall out of a boat. Maybe last night was one of those nights for K-State. Like I said, you had less than 5 points about 10 minutes into the game, and you ended up scoring just 53 total. So it could have just been one of those nights for K-State. But offensively, this team is certainly challenged when you look at some of the recent performances against, albeit really good offensive teams, though.
Absolutely. I don't really want to get too much into the Kansas game. I mean, that was just a whitewash. I mean, they're just better than Oklahoma State. I'm really kind of looking forward to this weekend. I think there's going to be some really good games. Obviously, the marquee game is Kansas hosting Houston for this weekend. But just taking a look at some of the games this weekend, besides that, because that's everybody's talking about that, anything else that stands out to you guys that maybe people aren't necessarily looking at? The one that I think, well, I'll just ask you guys first off. I mean, I know the Iowa State Baylor game. I think that's going to be the next one up on the clip. But there's anything else that stands out to you guys that maybe might be a little bit off the radar?
Yeah, there's a couple for me. I think the Texas TCU game is certainly an interesting one. I feel like TCU's kind of ridden a weird wave this season where they've like done well in conference play where they get off to a good start. You know, they're maybe a bad call going their way at KU of winning an Allen Fieldhouse Open Big 12 play. They got a good win against Oklahoma. They then beat Houston, but then they go on the road and they lose to Cincinnati. They come up and play Iowa State in Fort Worth and they lose that game despite, you know, Iowa State not having their best player in Taman Lipsey. And now they've won 3 more in a row. And I feel like this game against Texas is really big. You know, I feel like Texas has kind of started to play better here of late. They were right in it with Houston, especially in the second half on Monday night. They did lose at BYU, but I think Texas is playing better. But I think this is a really big opportunity for Texas to kind of continue some positive momentum that they might have if they're trying to make it into the NCAA tournament. Because I think that they're right there on that, maybe on the in part of the bubble, but I think that they're kind of inching a little bit closer to the edge. And Jared, I know you're obviously looking ahead to the Texas Tech Cincinnati game. That's one to me that's really interesting because, you know, Texas Tech has been playing really well. You know, they were tied in first place at the league until last night when they lost to TCU. But Cincinnati is a team that's been really tough for a lot of teams to put away. And I think that the Cincinnati team is capable of beating the NCAA tournament. And again, I think they're one of those teams that kind of like Texas, they're right on the bubble, but they might be inching a little bit closer towards the edge one way or the other.
Yeah, I'm interested in the Iowa State Baylor game. I'm not sure how good either one of those teams are. I think they're both good, like go Sweet 16 type teams. I really believe that, depending on the draw and all that stuff. You know, all these factors we can't possibly know yet. But how good are they? You know, like I'm interested to see that matchup. Are they maybe even better than that? That's my question. Obviously, the Houston-Kansas game, I think Houston's better than Kansas. It's in Lawrence. We all know what that means. We'll see. We'll see what happens with that. You know, especially, I mean, how they call that game. If they let Houston be physical, Houston's probably going to win that game. If they call every little ticky tack and kind of bizarre calls here or there, you know, that don't make sense in terms of both ends of the court, then Kansas will probably win. So, I mean, I'm not a like blame the ref guy. I think you have to overcome adversity and all those things, but I mean, come on, at some point you have to be like, all right, that's a real thing. You know, it's the big part of their home court advantage. And hey, they've earned it. I get it, all that, but it is a factor. Texas Tech, Cincinnati, to me, it's key. It goes back to defensive rebounding for Texas Tech. Cincinnati up front, that's really their strength. They can really rebound. I mean, if Tech secures the glass, if they're able, it becomes like at a certain point with Tech, it's not effort. It's, I mean, the other guys are just bigger and taller. I mean, it really gets to that at some point. And those guys are trying really hard too. They're just taller than the shorter, you know. So, you know, that's going to be a problem. But Tech's at home. Tech's really tough at home, like many of the schools around the Big 12. I expect them to win, but I wouldn't be shocked if Cincinnati won. I know both teams could really use this win, but I feel like I say that going into every Big 12 game. It feels almost like talking about football as opposed to basketball, just because every game becomes so important for not just conference standings, but, you know, of course, their tournament resumes.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to say too, Jared, is like every game now, just because of how good the conference is, every game becomes that much more important. And you can't you got to hold home court. You know, I think that's the main thing. So for Texas Tech, I think they got to hold home court because Cincinnati, again, while we think they're going to be a team that makes the tournament, they're kind of on the fringe right now, and they're going to be looking to try to get a marquee win. And winning at Texas Tech is absolutely a marquee win for them. So turning towards the future, I'm just looking at the conference as a whole, just looking on the outside. I mean, I know we've talked a lot, and there's been a lot of talk about it being the best conference, and I don't think that's up for debate by anybody as far as it being the best conference. Taking a look at the outside, looking at maybe the Big East being another conference or the SEC. I know we talked about last week, we talked about the number of teams getting into the tournament. It's tough right now for the Big 12 because, like you said, you mentioned about Kansas State and Texas. I'm just not sure those teams are in. if the national perception, if those teams don't get in, do you still think the national perception, Jared, is that the Big 12 is still the best conference if they get, let's call it, 8 teams in the tournament?
Yes. I mean, to me, like if everyone has their biases, and there's going to be SEC guys that will say, hey, SEC is a good basketball conference as well. The Big East is the only team or the only conference I could see I will even listen to, and there are some people who really know their stuff around the country who aren't like biased towards either conference. And they'll say, look, Big East, they're closer than some people think. But I think it's widely accepted that the Big 12 is the best basketball conference in the country. Even if they only get 8 teams. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree with that. I do think if you wanted to entertain a conversation about it, you could say that, you only feel like there's one team in the Big 12. At least I personally only feel like there's one team in the Big 12 who's capable of winning a national championship right now, the way things currently stand. I just don't think Kansas has enough depth. And I know that they shoot the ball well from the perimeter in terms of a percentage, I guess, but they don't shoot a high enough volume of them for it to really kind of matter. Like the math doesn't work in their favor very often. And if you look at just like Kansas's Ken Page, they're not really elite at anything. Like I think KU is a good team, but I don't think that they're an elite basketball team like we've seen in years past out of KU rosters. Whereas like if you look at the Big East, like I think UConn is one of the no doubt 2 best teams in the country. I think Purdue out of the Big Ten is one of the 2 best teams in the country now in the NCAA tournament. Purdue certainly has to prove it. And I think the SEC has at least a couple teams who, at least could play their way into that conversation. I think Tennessee is right there. People have questions about their offense though. But Dalton Connect is awesome. I think Kentucky's the absolute inverse of Tennessee, where they can score with everyone in the country, but their defense is horrible. Right. I'm not a huge believer in Auburn. They don't have any great wins at this point. I think they're a good team. I don't think that they're like a Final Four threat. And, Alabama is like a metrics darling, but they don't really have any great wins at this point either. So I think Houston is the one team in the Big 12 where you feel confident that they can make it to a Final Four and potentially win a national title. And then I think there's a lot of teams in the rest of the league that can make it to the second weekend. And I think that that's why the Big 12 is the best league. Because if you look at the Big 10, I think that there's 2 or 3 teams that you feel like can make it to the second weekend. In the Big East, there's maybe 2 or 3 at most that you feel like can make it. But in the Big 12, I think you can see up to 4 or 5 potentially make it to the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, we're going to take a quick break here from our partners at Synergy Financial. Next, we'll start talking a little bit of college football. The schedules came out for the Big 12, so we'll get into that next after a quick break.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the mission is to change the way Americans plan for their financial future. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's head back to the studio.
All right, welcome back to the Big 12 Insiders. Again, this is Brien Hanley, joined today by Alec Busey and Jared Johnson. Again, thank you to our sponsor, Synergy Financial Partners, synergyfinancial.com. So, fellas, the schedules for Big 12 football came out. Just taking a look at some things. We talked a little bit yesterday about certain schools. So, I'll start with you, Jared. Tell me what stands out maybe with Texas Tech's schedule as far as good, bad. Yesterday we talked to UCF and Cincinnati, and both of them had schedules that coming into the league showed that they could get back. Maybe struggled a little bit, but especially Cincinnati, they had a schedule that it looked like, we struggled a little bit last year, but this is kind of a schedule that we may be able to get back into some things. Texas Tech, tell me a little bit about their schedule and what you see in it.
Yeah, the 2 things that stand out the most is the fact that there's 7 home games this in terms of non-conference and Big 12 play, 5 in the Big 12, and then 2 bye weeks, which I don't remember the last time Texas Tech had 2 bye weeks.
Yeah.
It's been a long time. And, bye weeks can go either direction. It can, if a team's hot, it could cool them off. And if a team is injured or, struggling, that break can really help them. So there's no telling. Though, one bye week may really help them and one may really hurt them, or who knows, everything in between that. It's Honestly, it looks a little light, the schedule, if you look at it. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's some tough games on there, but Tech doesn't play Kansas State or Kansas or UCF. Some teams I think that'll probably be pretty good next year. At Iowa State is a tough one in early November. It's going to be cold. How cold? I don't know, but nobody likes to go play in Ames in November, right? So that's tough. Colorado here with Coach Prime and all that, that'll be a circus probably. That'll be newsworthy. But I like the schedule overall.
Gotcha. Alec, what do you think? What are you looking at as far as Iowa State? Anything that stands out in your opinion?
Yeah, like Jarrett said, Iowa State also has 2 bye weeks. I think one thing that is interesting from an Iowa State perspective is that they have 2 bye weeks, like I said, but every single one of their games is also going to be on a Saturday. I went through and counted the amount of games in the Big 12 this upcoming season that have the potential to be played on a Thursday, Friday. And I believe it was up to 20. Obviously, with the TV contract, there's going to be more games being played on Thursdays or Fridays just because of the increased inventory across the conference. And ESPN and Fox only have so many television windows. So I think if you're an Iowa State fan, that's certainly something that makes you happy and makes you excited is, especially for home games, all of your games are at home. So you don't have to worry about all of your home Saturday games are on a Saturday. So you don't have to worry about your tailgating plans getting messed up on a Friday night or a Thursday night. So I think that's great. I think one thing that's really interesting, and this is more from a big picture perspective, from a conference-wide idea, I guess. Iowa State plays Kansas next season. I forget if Texas Tech does, Jarrett, but Iowa State plays Kansas, and it's actually going to be at Arrowhead in Kansas City because obviously KU is getting the big renovation done to the booth that costs like $450 million or whatever it is for basically a brand new facility or stadium, I guess I should say. And that game's going to be in Arrowhead. I think that'll be a really cool experience for fans. I don't want to say it's going to be like Red River or like the cocktail party with, Georgia and Florida. But I think that there's a good possibility for that to be a potential where, maybe you get a 50-50 split with the crowd. Maybe Arrowhead's really, really full and it gets pretty exciting from a fan perspective where you got both fan bases well represented there and it gets loud and it gets a little bit contentious between 2 schools that should be pretty good this upcoming season when you think about the rise that KU's had the last couple of seasons under Lance Leipold. And then, Iowa State returns, I think, 20 of 22 starters next season after winning 7 games this year is a little bit of a surprise team. I think that Iowa State's one of the teams that you can kind of see potentially winning, 8 or 9 games next season and being in the Big 12 title picture. And then one last thing I guess I had from an Iowa State perspective, last season, the month of November was not kind to them. They've had their toughest games at the end of the season. They played Kansas and Ames. They went to BYU. They played Texas and Ames, and then they went on the road and ended the season at K-State. They're going to do the same thing this upcoming season where their November is tough. They play Texas Tech first week of November, like you said, Jarrett. Then they go and play KU at Arrowhead, but then they also play Cincinnati and Ames, and then they have to go to Utah and against K-State in their last 2 weeks. So I think their last 2 weeks are their most difficult games of the season potentially.
Yeah, it makes it tough. But that was the one game I know K-State fans don't like to hear, that Iowa State game in the snow last year. That was brutal. But said that, looking at some of these schedules, I looked at Utah, and we all think that Utah is going to be good. Now, granted, they got a 100-year-old back playing quarterback for them, but that's a different conversation for a different day. But I think looking at the outside looking in, you look at their schedule, and Utah looks like a team that can come right into the conference. You knew they were going to be good anyway, but you look at their schedule and you're thinking, okay, well, they got a shot here. I looked at a couple of others. Obviously, I looked at Kansas State. I looked at Colorado. I think the team for me that outside of Houston that's going to stand out, that I think can stand out, depending on what happens with their roster and how all the turnover and everything turns out, I'm thinking Oklahoma State has another chance to be really good. I don't know that they're necessarily going to win the conference again, but I think they have another chance to be really good. Look, nobody thought they were going to be good last year, and their schedule ended up turning out okay. They didn't have to play everybody, but then they ended up being in the Big 12 championship game, and they beat Kansas State. They won a game that they probably weren't favored to win. I think they got another shot to be really good here, guys. let me know what you guys think. Is there anybody on the outside that maybe everybody's not thinking about that you guys think can be really good as a surprise?
I talk about Iowa State. I don't know if they're
Mhm.
like a super trendy pick. Like I said, returning 20 of 22 starters. I think that they're a team that you could potentially see be pretty solid. Jared, I don't want to upset your listening base, but Texas Tech's kind of a team that I feel like everyone every offseason gets really trendy towards picking. I kind of want to see them have the success on the field in terms of winning 9 or 10 games before I like fully commit to that. I feel like this last offseason was the best example of that, but they are bringing in a lot of talent. Obviously, a 5-star receiver. You'd have to remind me of his name. Is it Micah Hudson?
Yes.
Yeah, sweet.
Yep.
All right, maybe I do know Texas Tech's recruiting board better than I thought I did. I think that Texas Tech is certainly trending in the right direction. You just need some stability at the quarterback position, and I do believe in what Joey McGuire is doing down there. And long term, I know that this maybe won't hold as true in 2024, but Arizona State's a team that I believe a ton in under head coach Kenny Dillingham. I love his energy. I love his commitment to ASU and everything he's trying to do there. So ASU maybe not as much in 2024, but maybe 2025, 2026 when Jaden Rashada gets a little bit older at quarterback and Kenny Dillingham gets a little bit more talent. And I'll keep buying my Arizona State stock.
Yeah, I think UCF is a program to watch. They recruit well.
Mhm.
They're in a great, obviously fertile recruiting area. I like their coach. I like what they do offensively. I think they would have been they were one of the best offensive teams in the Big 12 last year when they were healthy, when Plumlee was healthy and all that. I mean, they were pretty tough offensively. If they can recruit more athletes on the defensive side of the ball, which they are, they had one of the best classes in 2024 in the new Big 12. Then I think they could be a program to watch. I mean, everything's set up there for UCF to take a step forward, and they've been good for a while, obviously in a non-power Power 5 conference. But Texas Tech. I think a lot of the fans feel like you do, Alec, about show me. Quit talking about it and show me. They won 7 games last year. They won another bowl game. That's good and all. But it definitely was a disappointing season. Going to Wyoming and losing that game in overtime the way they did, and then losing to Oregon the next week when they had a lead in the fourth quarter. That really was a big setback for the whole season, really. They had a good November. They had an opposite. I mean, other than getting blasted in Austin, Tech had another great November, and we've seen that 2 years in a row now under Joey McGuire. So that's a new thing at Texas Tech. Normally in November, they struggle because they haven't had the depth. That goes back to recruiting. But you mentioned Oklahoma State, Brien, and you mentioned for Utah having a 100-year-old quarterback. Well, Alan Bowman, I mean, that's Van Wilder right there. I mean, I remember going to his high school games as a senior, covered in recruiting. When Cliff Kingsbury recruited him to Texas Tech.
Yes, that's crazy.
Mean, Alan Bowman was still playing college football. So tough dude. I remember those collapsed lungs, those hits he took. It all started against West Virginia one game. He took a shot right after he threw the ball, and he's tough. I think a lot of guys would have quit by now after having those injuries. But and I was skeptical of Oklahoma State last year because Alan Bowman, like I don't know,
right.
But give them credit. They change. And this is what Gundy does. Their teams get better throughout the seasons. Every season. He's done it for years and years now. And they switched to a more power running game and did some things passing off of that with Bowman.
Right.
And it worked. They got to the Big 12 championship. And they bring a lot of, I think most of that offense back next year. So I think Oklahoma State's going to be tough. Utah's going to be tough. Kansas State's going to be tough they're going to be Kansas State,
Yes.
And I don't know about Iowa State. I'm kind of like you, Alec, about Tech. Like, I want to see that. Is the potential there? Absolutely. But I want to see it for sure, just like I want to see it from the Red Raiders.
I think another one that's kind of interesting and worth tracking is West Virginia. Yes. They should return Garrett Green at quarterback. I think CJ Donaldson is back at tailback for them. I don't know a ton about their depth chart and what all returns and what doesn't, but they were a pretty surprising team this past season. I think they ended up winning 8 games. Everyone kind of had Neil Brown fired before the year started. And I think he did one of the better coaching jobs in the entire Big 12 last season. And he obviously took over play calling, and they kind of seemed to get back to his identity that they had at Troy when he got hired at West Virginia. So I think that, that's certainly one that, isn't being talked about a lot, that West Virginia could be a team that maybe it's surprising. And if you win, 8 or 9 games, you're going to be right there in the picture heading into the last 2 weeks, I would imagine, in the Big 12, because I just don't know if there's enough talent from one specific roster construction to like run through the Big 12 and go 11-1 or 12-0. And quite honestly, like, I don't know how often that's going to be like a commonality in college football anymore with what the schedules are going to look like across college football in general, just because, schedules are now so much more difficult than they were before.
Right. Well, travel matters, and people think that it's a big thing or not a big thing just because you travel on Friday and play the next game. But, if you're BYU or Arizona State, and you have to go to UCF, it's a long plane ride, so that's a long time to be traveling to go to a football game. And let's face it, guys aren't professionals. They're still college students. So regardless if they get paid or not, they're still college students. So it's that travel makes a difference. Another team that I'm going to look at, and I'm going to jump on the sword. Obviously, I think Kansas State is going to be Kansas State. I'm going to jump on the Colorado sword. I think that Colorado, even though, look, trying to live in the transfer portal is not going to be sustainable. You just can't build your program getting 5 and 6 guys from high school. You're just not going to be able to do that. They're going to have to change that to be sustainable. But for next year, I think they got a shot. Just for the simple fact of some of the guys that they are bringing in that can be difference makers, I think they have a chance to be really good. Now, the difference is attrition. That's kind of their offensive and defensive lines were just horrible last year, but attrition is going to be their problem, is because I don't know what the 44 looks like. The 22 may look good, but this is football. Guys get hurt, bones break, ligaments tear. It's just the way it works. I don't know what that 44 is going to look like. But if you match their 22 up against anybody, it may be just as good as anybody in the conference. But when it comes down to it, I mean, preseason, in non-conference, when it comes down to it, I don't know what's left of that 44 once you get to, I don't know, let's call it the middle of October. What is their roster going to look like at that point? Because, again, you have to develop. If you don't develop, your program is not going to be good. I know Dion wants to try to do it a different way. And look, if it's successful, great, because I don't root for anybody to not be successful. But at the same time, you just can't – it's not sustainable to just dive into the transfer portal, not recruit, not develop football players. You just can't win that way.
No, I certainly agree with that. And I feel like – and I don't want to be like a Dion hater and – him call me out after he wins his first 3 games. And do you believe? I do kind of believe, Coach Prime. I do kind of. But I don't believe as much as I used to, because I don't like the way you're recruiting and building your roster much as I thought I would. I thought that he would do a really good job recruiting prospects. But he really hasn't. And quite honestly, like you said, he hasn't really even tried.
No.
So to me, he's kind of doing it like he's not going to be there for the long term. Now, whether that means he's trying to get to another job or maybe his health status, he's got the blood clots, he's had a couple toes and stuff amputated because of injuries sustained during his playing career and just some of those lingering things. Maybe he doesn't want to coach there for a really long time, and he's got the health things. His sons aren't going to be there for very much longer. Maybe that's just a thought. I don't really know, but I do understand the entry there. Like, I don't know how many quarterbacks in the Big 12 next season that you feel like are as talented or as capable as Shedeur Sanders is entering next season. I mean, obviously, Cam Rising is one there. Noah Fafita at Arizona is another. Avery Johnson at K-State certainly has a talent. He'll have to show it a little bit more on the field than he did this past year. Rocco Becht at Iowa State is returning after winning Big 12 Offensive Freshman of the Year. Jalen Daniels has been great his entire career at KU, but he struggled to stay healthy. Garrett Green's proven to be a winner at West Virginia, but I still think Shedeur has a higher ceiling than a lot of those guys do. Maybe not all of them, but at least some. So Colorado's intrigue is certainly there, but they just need to be a lot better on the line of scrimmage for me to want to buy stock, because their offensive line was not very good, and they've also had a lot of turnover on their staff, which I also think is kind of concerning entering just the second year of the head coach's tenure.
Yeah, it's like chaos that's going on there.
There's a couple,
right, Alec. It's chaos that tends to be going on. That it's the coaching staff turnover, the lack of just trying. You said it correctly. They're just not trying to recruit high school recruits. So it's like, what's the agenda here? What are you trying to do? I understand they've they've generated a lot of interest. Okay, that's great. They've built Colorado back into a brand, because when I was coming up, when I was in college, Colorado was a huge brand. It just was. And I go, and they've been bad for so long, not just average. Colorado hasn't been an average football team. They have been bad for forever. And he generated some interest, and that's great. But at some point, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, it's like, look, the style's got to meet the substance. Or the substance got to meet the style, I should say. I go, because it's a lot of pub. The media generated it. We got behind it. And then we saw what was happening. And I think Tom Luganbill said it best, is like everybody got all over him after the first game of the year that they won a football game, when he said their offensive line was terrible. But if you actually watch the football game, they didn't run the ball. The offensive line wasn't great. And as the season went on, he was 100% correct, Jared. I mean, he called it exactly how it was. And then I didn't hear any apologies come his way, but that's kind of how it works.
Yeah, I think I said it on last week when I was on the show, but I really feel like recruiting and how you recruit right now is the most accurate reflection of the health of your program. And as Alex said, what is Dion and his staff telling us about the way they're recruiting? Everything's short term. They're not building for the future by going heavy transfer portal and so light high school. I mean, it is not sustainable, and neither is throughout the season any kind of level of success when you have no depth on your roster. Correct. Which is what happened to Colorado last year. Some guys got beat up. They were in one emotional game after another, it seemed like, and they won a lot of those games, to their credit, because of some of the talent and just the offensive execution overall. But yeah, it wasn't sustainable for that season, and recruiting that way isn't sustainable in terms of the future of your program. I'm not a Dion hater either. I'm a wound to the tomb Dallas Cowboys fan. So I love Dion, what he did as his time as a Cowboys, coming up in the Metroplex and multi-generation dude growing up there in DFW. I'm a huge Cowboys fan. Dion is chaos. That's what he is. Always has been. But he's also been very successful in several areas of his life as well. And so it's people are going to talk about it. That's like the whole old Howard Cosell thing. People either loved him or hate him, but they weren't indifferent about him. And that's, I think, where we see like Dion as a coach and just a personality. And one other thing I want to mention, Brien, that you brought up earlier in the show, which I thought was a good point, was the travel involved right now with college football, just some of this crazy, how long it is and how it is a factor. Not only that, but early on, traveling to new places and the logistics of that. This is something that people don't think about, but somebody has to figure out how to get everybody from the airport to the hotel to the facility and just all those things that take up time, where if you're used to going to Ames or Lubbock or whatever every year, okay, we're going to do this. There's some kind of comfort in that for athletes in knowing, okay, this is what we're going to do from here to here, where you're just focusing on the game. And that's something that I know, like with Tech going to Baylor after they had played in DFW for, 12 years or something like that, and weren't doing home and away or home and homes. When they got back to it, it was like, that was a focus. Like, they got to get used to being in Waco and seeing this stadium. Don't just show up at game time and then be the first time you see the stadium. I think it does play. It's not, ultimately it's decided by the players on the field, but I do think that is a factor that we're going to see. A lot of these Big 12 teams are going to be going to new places for the first time.
Absolutely. So we talked about this a little yesterday, and I'll bring this point up before I let you guys go, is, the perception the Big 12 is not one of the top tier conferences in the country, which, okay, that's fine. They're going to have to earn that kind of respect. Losing Oklahoma and Texas obviously doesn't help. So they're going to have to try to earn that over time. Do you guys see the conference, and I'll start with you, Jared, do you see the conference as being somebody that we need to take the leap and be the leader, maybe 2 or 3 teams to be in charge and say, okay, these 2 or 3 teams are good every single year. We got to start talking about them nationally, because I think that's where the Big 12, as far as football, is going to get left out nationally, because you lose a OU, you lose a Texas. And so you're not going to have that national brand that everybody's talking about. Do you need 2 or 3 teams to take those reins? Or do you think it's better to have somebody different every 3 or 4 years come up and take the reins? to be in charge and be part of the program or part of the conference, the face of the conference per se?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to get things done, right? I mean, I think either or would work. But, I mean, basketball, that's kind of how it's been. I mean, Baylor won a championship. Kansas won a championship. Tech got to the championship game. So Kansas State, now Houston, of course, have been to some Final Fours, and they're in the Big 12. So you have multiple teams, and that's where the respect comes in. Like, man, look at all those good teams out there. Different teams are going to the Final Four, going to national championships or winning championships. That would be nice. I don't know if that's possible, but I think, like, for example, TCU beating Michigan in the semifinals the previous season, that raised a lot of eyebrows. Like, hey, it's not OU or Texas coming from the Big 12, but then they got blown out in the national championship game against Georgia. So it was like all that respect that was kind of won in that semifinal game was just, I mean, everyone's like, okay, they went up against, a big time SEC team and got blown out. I think that really hurt the brand, to be honest, the Big 12 brand. So in the new playoff format, it would be nice. I don't know how many Big 12 schools are going to get in, but if it's just one, if that team goes on a pretty good run, I mean, that would help. I think early on, it's important. Also, I want to say the UT thing leaving, that's a really media-driven
100%
storyline in terms 100%. Of like that people don't care about watching Big 12 teams play. I don't believe that. I believe there is a lot of interest in watching, let's say, Utah play at Kansas State. I'd watch that game. I'm a college football fan. Or the Iowa State Kansas game in Arrowhead. I'm going to watch that if I can. I mean, I think that's overblown. I think that's a business thing and a media-driven storyline, to be honest.
I think what makes the Big 12 really exciting is that there's so many schools that are so closely and evenly matched from a talent perspective moving forward that it's going to lead to a lot of really competitive games every single Saturday where, you don't feel like every single year that there's going to be a team, to use the Big Ten as an example, that's like Rutgers was for the last decade before Greg Schiano got there, where they were just getting pounded, 56-3 when they played Ohio State, or a Vanderbilt in the SEC when they play Alabama to lose 66-7. I feel like the Big 12 doesn't have any of those teams, and I think that will make a really interesting race every single year for the conference title. And I also think that'll play into the 12-team playoff and how the Big 12 is able to position themselves for that with the one auto bid and then potentially one or two at-large bids if things really work in their favor. But yeah, I think that I think the Big 12 would benefit from having a team climb up and be a perceived national championship contender, because I feel like ever since the CFP kind of became a thing back in 2014, 2015, that first regular season was 2014, and then the first CFP would have been in January of 2015. So much of the national conversation about college football shifted away from the regular season and towards the CFP and the national championship race. So I think it'll be really interesting to see if the Big 12 is able to get a program to really look like they are a national championship contender. Because right now, I think on paper, it's hard to say that there's a team in the Big 12 heading into 2024 that you feel like, okay, that's a team that can 100% go win a national championship. But there's certainly teams and programs who you feel like can make it to the playoff. Like there's a lot of those. Arizona is one of those. We'll have to see how well it goes with the new head coach, but they're one of those. I think Utah's one of those. K-State's one of those. We talked earlier about teams that could surprise. I mean, maybe Oklahoma State rises up. I said West Virginia. There's so many teams in the Big 12 that I think have the ability to win 8 to 10 games a year. And I think that that's what makes the Big 12 so entertaining and so exciting, is that there's so many teams that every single weekend are going to play tight, entertaining games down to the last possession. We're getting a lot of 2-minute drill offenses, and that's so much fun to watch.
Absolutely. Well, for me, I think that's what's going to separate the Big 12 from the Big 10. I mean, and the ACC's out there, but from the Big 10 and the SEC is having teams, so many good teams that can compete week in and week out. Because one knock that we always talk about the Big 10 and the SEC is they're top heavy. They have 2 teams that can win it every year, and then it's everybody else. Yeah. And that is always the case. I mean, the Big 10 is absolutely the case. It's Ohio State and Michigan, and every now and then Penn State is hanging around, but they can never beat them. Wisconsin's the same thing. They can never beat them. So it's always the same teams, and the same thing in the SEC. So I think that is what's going to separate. And me personally, I think that's what the Big 12's got to lean on. I think they got to lean on It's anybody can win. We don't have to have the big national brand out there that everybody's going to go watch. Look, OU and Texas were that, but we, as Big 12 people, we knew, I mean, before this past year, when was the last time OU and Texas had even been in the Big 12 championship game, or last time Texas had even won the Big 12? I mean, so that's the whole thing. It's like, yeah, I get it. They're the big national brand, but at the same time, I just think that the Big 12's got to lean into heavily that, hey, we're a conference that is super exciting. We got a lot of really good football teams in this conference, and every single year you don't know who it's going to be. I mean, Oklahoma State, it could be a Baylor, it could be a TCU, an Iowa State, Texas Tech. Every single season, and I just believe me personally, I just think we got to just lean into that and make that our own.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And I think that's why the Big 12 has potential to be so exciting. Is like I said, there's going to be so many good games, and it feels like it's almost unpredictable. And everyone has asked for parity in college football ever since the 4-team CFP kind of went into effect. And the Big 12 is going to provide more parity than any other of the major power conferences heading into the new future of college football. And I think that's fun. And I think fans are going to enjoy it.
Absolutely. So, well, I appreciate you guys, man. Thank you guys for joining the show again. I know we're doing our best here. We're putting these things out. I appreciate you guys making the time, man. We'll keep getting better. We'll keep having you guys back as many times as you guys want to come. So I appreciate you guys taking the time today. And we're going to have one last break from our partners at Synergy Financial. So we appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the vision is to build the world's largest consumer financial education and empowerment company. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's head back to the studio.
All right. Well, Fitz, another one down. Look, I know we beat on this earlier about Kansas State. It was a mess yet last night. It was just a mess. I don't know how they're going to fix it. I'll be honest with you. I just don't know how that happens. I'm looking around the league at other offenses, and we're struggling. We're just struggling to get points. Now, the good thing about it, though, Fitz, is it could just be a lull. It could just be, this is a part of the season. Every team goes through it. This could just be a lull. There is so much more basketball left to be played. But if you're looking at it and you followed them all year, okay, where does it change? Where do they get the points? When can this start? I think it's got to start on Saturday. Oh, you're muted.
That's 2 in a row. I'm getting good at being muted. We talked about this on the PowerCat podcast. I've talked about this a number of times. They're in the midst of this 7-game streak, 6 of which are ranked teams, and they've lost 3. They've lost to 3 ranked teams, including one at home. So they've surrendered that West Virginia win on the road. So now they're back to 500, literally at 4-4. Getting an opportunity to win another road game, and this being the unranked team in that stretch, Saturday's enormous at Oklahoma State, backed up with the fact that on Monday, Kansas comes to Bramlage Coliseum.
Right.
So if you're 4-5 with your feelings hurt, you're not feeling good about how you're playing, and you have Kansas coming in on Monday, it's a horrible formula. So winning this game is absolutely enormous to right yourself. And I'll be blunt, it gives you a little leeway if you don't beat Kansas, because you're still at 500. And that's been my goal with this 7-game stretch, is they need to come out at 500, which means win 2 out of the 7. And I think they might get there. But
yeah,
they squandered an opportunity last night at home to beat a team that they should have been able to beat.
Yeah, and it was tough to watch too, because I turn it on and I'm like, okay, the game's 4-0. And then all of a sudden we're 10 minutes in and we have 2 points. I'm like, what is going on here? So it's brutal. But looking around the league, Fitz, again, there's good basketball coming up on Saturday. I mean, for everybody. You know, I'm not trying to pass over the games that we have tonight, but I think Saturday is another weekend that the Big 12 can just showcase its muscle on how good this conference is. I mean, everybody's going to talk about the Kansas-Houston game, and they should. They absolutely should, because they are both really, really good. But Iowa State going to Baylor, Cincinnati at Texas Tech. I mean, there are some really good basketball games, and we see it every week with this conference, man.
Yeah, it is going to be quite interesting on Saturday with this first, what I think is going to be a premium rivalry in the nation with Kansas and Houston. I think Houston's the best team in the conference, but they need to replicate what they do at home a little bit better on the road, almost losing at Texas. They found a way to win in overtime. But if they can do that, they're clearly the best team in this conference, because we've seen Kansas now, as Alex said during the show, everyone's warts get exposed. And Kansas State now has everything on film, and everyone's going to try to do what Houston and Oklahoma have done, which is just take you completely out of your offense with defense. Well, Kansas also has some points of exposure, particularly with depth. So I'm fascinated to see how that comes out, but a lot of very even matchups. And sadly for K-Staters, including K-State, Oklahoma State, this is a really even matchup. And I think it's going to be an incredible, entertaining day in Big 12 basketball, but all of them tend to be.
Absolutely. So I'm looking forward to it. Well, I appreciate everybody joining in and tuning in. Remember, we are Monday, or let's take that back, Tuesday through Friday at 1 p.m., the Big 12 Insiders. Please come and watch us. Remember to subscribe to GoPowerCat.com. We appreciate it. We will come back tomorrow and do it better. Have a good one.
This has been a GoPowerCat.com and Spirit Street production. Please support this show by subscribing to this YouTube channel or follow us on your favorite podcast platform.